Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Design with the Bard. I'm your host, Creepy Bard, and tonight we'll be talking about the mercy mechanic in Undertale. For those of you who haven't seen Undertale, it's a menu-driven RPG that has one key difference that makes it stand out from the pack. You don't have to kill anyone. There are a lot of games that don't involve killing, but this was a drastic change from the norm. This is because a lot of games that don't involve killing tend to take out the combat entirely, never really replacing it with anything. This is a problem that a lot of so-called walking simulators have. However, Undertale approached this from a totally different perspective, leaving the combat in the game and working the non-combat options into that combat. But before we discuss the mechanic itself, let's take a look at the background for this game and understand where this mechanic came from. Undertale, being an indie darling, has a lot of information floating around about where it came from and why developer Toby Fox decided that he wanted to make it. The general consensus seems to be that Toby made the combat system first and then focused on making interesting characters, building the story and the rest of the gameplay around this core combat system. Because of this completely immersed type of design, this is one of the few games that I would consider almost perfectly designed. The narrative isn't just woven through the dialogue, but in the very mechanics and aesthetic of the game, and every piece is thoroughly considered before being used. However, we're here to focus on the mercy mechanic itself, as this is the piece that makes the entire game come together. At this point, if you haven't played Undertale and intend to, you should stop watching right now, play the game, and then watch this, at least past the first boss fight. We're going to get pretty spoilery here to the point where I'll just be showing the entire boss fight and going over it thoroughly. Really, go grab the game, it's usually sitting at around $10 on Steam, and it's money well spent. The mercy mechanic is, at its core, a puzzle. While normal combat is handled with a small, skill-based event determined by the weapon you're using, the mercy mechanic requires the player to use the visual cues that come from the enemy's design and name to figure out what they need to do to help that character, or at least convince them to stop attacking. Most characters have something that stands out about their individual design, or even their name, that cues the player into what they need to do, but almost every boss character requires understanding their motivations and why they are who they are as a character. Take Toriel, the first boss at the end of the tutorial. Throughout the tutorial, Toriel guides you through the ruins and goes out of her way to protect you as you explore the area, even going so far as to hold your hand through one of the traps. However, in this fight, the usually happy, if slightly unhinged Toriel becomes visibly sterner and barely talks to the player, as opposed to her usual talkative self. She'll silently look through you as she constantly attacks you. This is when you're given the choice to either attack her, bringing her life to 0 and slaying her, or to simply talk her down. If you choose to talk her down, she will continue to attack you, but will eventually calm down and beg you to stay on this side of the portal. Her continuing to attack you is important because it means that you have to make a conscious decision to spare her life, and you can't make that decision accidentally. And this is what brings us to why this mechanic is so important. By making mercy a conscious choice in the face of adversity, Toby Fox has done something that few developers have managed to do. He's taken the pacifism option and made it just as exciting and visceral as the violence option, which is something the gaming industry as a whole hasn't even considered since we started making games. With this breakthrough on the market, I can promise you that we'll see more games trying to implement this as a system. It'll likely be exclusive to the indie market for a while, as the AAA industry is hilariously slow to adjust, and has a tendency to be run by people who are completely out of touch with the gaming public. I mean, hell, just look at Konami. Overall, though, this is a beautifully designed mechanic, and I'm very excited to see this type of thing eventually picked up by the AAA industry, where it can get polished to a mirror shine. Hey everyone, thanks so much for checking out our first video in the new format. Let us know what you think about it in the comments below, and give us some suggestions for other game mechanics you think are important. We just might use them in a later video. If you enjoyed this video and want to see us make similar content, feel free to support us on Patreon. If you're new to the channel, you can always go back and check out some of our older videos, but be warned, it gets pretty ugly. As always, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we hope you'll join us next week for our history video about whether or not history is fiction and if that even matters.